Martes, anus Grigoriana, Generekes Anverino Kosama, Avehesh Batsatan, Kalor Chen, Anverin Chen Karo, Chenastanum. Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Grigorian. I'm a photojournalist, although these days I have a hard time calling myself a photographer because I don't take as many pictures as I used to. And actually I started carrying my camera around recently just so I can call myself a photographer. And I'm doing some street photography these days, or trying to do street photography. But all right, so what I was thinking about doing for today's presentation is, first I wanted to answer some of the questions that Museum Library had for me. After that, I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of, or I'm going to talk about my background a little bit, how I got into photography, what my inspirations were. These are questions that the library asked me to kind of address. And then I think I'm going to show you, well, what I plan on doing is show you some of the work that I've done throughout the years working as a photographer, as a professional photojournalist. And hopefully when I'm showing you those photos, some topics will come up that I can address. Maybe privacy, intruding on people's privacy, space, and a couple of other things. So just a little background about myself. I was born in Tehran, Iran, in 1969. In 1979, there was an Islamic Revolution. And so our family decided to move because, as Christians, it was going to be very difficult to live in an Islamic state. We moved to Los Angeles, and I grew up in Los Angeles. I went to college, university, and high school. And actually my high school, both in Iran, my school in Iran and in US, I went to private Armenian school, which is surprising that I still choose to speak in English and not in Armenian, because I've had a lot of, education in Armenian. But I was a terrible student all my life, so that explains why I got into photography and why I'm speaking English now. So I barely graduated high school in the US. Barely graduated. I cheat myself out of graduating high school. I went into college. In the US, you have two options if you want to continue your higher education. You either go to university, which you have to apply to, get accepted, or you go to an institution called the community college, which is a little different than the colleges we have in Armenia. Community colleges in the US are basically for students who can't transfer straight into a university, or if university might be too expensive, so they go into a community college to finish their lower level division courses before they can transfer to a more expensive university. So in my case, I couldn't get into a university, so I went to a community college. But my experience at the community college was what got me into photography and eventually photojournalism. I'm going to stress how bad of a student I am throughout this presentation. And so the first year I was at the college, I was put on probation because my grades were too low. I was basically kicked out of the college for a year. Said, this was in LA City. They said you basically can't come to our college. So I went to Glendale College, which is in LA, but it's not LA City. So I was allowed to go to Glendale College for a year. I came back and I realized, I'm really not able to do, I was having a really difficult time. I couldn't, I just couldn't get my grades up. I couldn't find something that I was interested in. I tried different classes. And I saw the photography class, the beginning photography class. And I'm like, you know what? This will be easy. And I gotta tell you, I teach now in Armenia, and photography, I'm gonna say it's hard, but it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of practice, it takes a lot of time. But in my head, I'm like, yeah, I'll do, photography will be easy class. I can bring up my grade point average. I didn't have a camera, but I found a camera. I took my father's camera without permission, and he was an architect, but he liked cameras, and I never allowed me to play with them. But So I took a class, and the first class was a very beginning class. We learned about composition, we learned about the technical aspects of a camera, how to use it manually. We understood what shutter speed was, aperture, and how to apply it to your, how they influence, impact your images. So I took that class, I thought, great. I really enjoyed it. And, so I took a second photography class, black and white. It was beginning black and white class. And this is a while ago. This is in '92 or something like that. So there was obviously no digital. Everything was done on film. You have to learn how to process, develop your film, how to print your film. So that's what we were doing. We were learning all that. I was really into it. And it wasn't until, it's still there. It wasn't until that second course, and I never thought about photography as a career. I didn't understand. I was a pretty sheltered kid, both in Iran and the US. In Iran, we were Armenian community in Iran. We didn't interact with other people. I was a kid also. We weren't allowed to go out in the street. Same with the US. I went from the age of 9 until the age of 18. My life was home, going to school, coming home. My friends were just, friends from school. I never interacted with anyone else. Again, we lived kind of like a sheltered life. When I went going into my second class, at the college, our instructor was a photojournalist himself. And he started, at some point, showing us pictures from the Vietnam War. And like I said, I was a sheltered kid. I didn't think about what's happening politically in the world. I think it's very different these days. Kids grew up knowing everything that's happening around the world, right? I really didn't care at that point. My focus was comic books, playing video games, flying remote control planes. That I was very limited, my understanding of what happens in the world. And I think that had a lot to do just being very closed off from the rest of the world, the family I grew up in at that point. So when I started seeing pictures of the Vietnam War, it just blew me away. I couldn't believe, and I was pretty naive. I couldn't believe there was war, there's these kinds of images coming out. The destruction that war causes, the suffering that, it blew me away. And I realized that, I'm like, there's a whole world out there. And for me, I think that being a little bit naive, I'm like, yeah, only if people saw what's happening around, in these situations, there wouldn't be problems or wars. But of course, that's not the case. But that's what my thinking was back then. So over time, I got really into photography. Just took more courses and more courses, and I just loved it. And I started doing around, it was 1992 starting. Even though I was in my beginning classes, we had a lot of things happening in Los Angeles. We had the LA riots. We had a lot of wildfires that affected the cities. We had the earthquake in 1994. So as a student, I was just I found it, I was very drawn to it. I didn't want to go away from the action. I wanted to run to the action. I wanted to see what was happening. I got pleasure out of being somewhere where other people weren't, Anyway, so I took this, I went to college, I transferred to university, I finally barely graduated at the university with a degree in journalism that was concentrated on photojournalism. And that was kind of my education, how I started. I wanted to really quickly talk about what my influences were. I don't have one or two influences. I think, I can even say that I was influenced by the other students in my class. I think the biggest thing that I learned from my education at the university was the community of photographers that were surrounded me. The way we pushed each other, it was like healthy competition. The way we wanted to do better than the other one. We loved each other, all of us. We were very close friends, but the way we wanted each other to outdo the other person in photography. So I think outside of photographers that influenced me. I think what I was influenced by the most through my university education was what was the friends that I was surrounded by who were also doing photography. So the reason I bring this up is because I think photography is something that could be self-taught. You don't necessarily have to go to learn photography. Journalism is a little different. There's ethical questions. There's a lot of questions that you have to learn in journalism school. But photography, I think, could be self-taught. But what I think, took out of university was the community that was around me, how they helped me grow as a photographer. So some of my inspirations, I guess, there's so many of them. It's ridiculous to name a few, but there's so many of them. But I know in the beginning when I started doing photography, National Geographic, when I was a student, because it was so much about, they were just beautiful images. There were beautiful colors, textures, compositions. So that really, I think, was the beginning of what was giving me inspiration, right? And then over time, there was photographers like Alex Webb. I don't know if you guys know Alex Webb. Like the way he used light and color, the combination. And then over time, it evolved to Eugene Richards. And I'm leaving out a lot of people. There's a lot of photographers out there. Eugene Richards, because Eugene Richards, I don't know if any of you guys know, some of you guys will know Eugene Richards, but this is in the late 80s, early 90s. He was covering stories that no one else would. About heroin usage, about prostitution, about gangs. He was covering so many stories, and I'm like, wow, how do you get access to that? What does it take to get that close? And he wasn't just, he was getting close, intimate close with these subjects that he would cover. So he was a big influence of mine. And then I think my pinnacle of influences were, I think, the two photographers were, I think, James Nockway and Sebastian Salgado. Because those two combined all of the other photographers' talents. They were able to get to stories, get very close. Their compositions were it's kind of, we talked a lot, as a professional, is it art or is it journalism? And sometimes the art overtakes the journalism part, the informative part of the image, and that becomes a concern sometimes. But for me, the work of James Nockway and Eugene Richards, because they were so intimate, they were addressing issues like famine, like war. They were addressing really important issues, but they were doing it in a way that was aesthetically just beautiful. And most of them, both of them actually worked a lot, mostly in black and white. So the color wasn't a thing there. But I think those, probably James Nockway is kind of what I wanted to, I don't want to say imitate at all, but that's kind of where I wanted to be. And I think, to be honest, it's hurt me a little, because I realized through the years that when I'm editing my photographs, if it's not composition perfect, I won't use it. And which is a big problem, because as a photographer, as a photojournalist, your most significant part of what you do is to get across information to the public, right? And if something is prevented, because I have an ego, something is preventing me from using that image, then I'm not doing a service. And so I've noticed that about myself, that I sometimes don't use images, and that's why it's good to have an editor, look at your work, because when you're looking at your own work, you have all these ideas about how an image should be, and you're missing some of the important aspects of the image, the information that you're getting across. So, anyways, I'm gonna kind of move on. So the first project that I want to show is the oldest project I have in my portfolio. My portfolio is my website. I have a website, it's ericgrigorian.com, Grigorian with an I. And it's the oldest work I have. It's the oldest work I have there, but it's really important to me, this work, because it kind of reflects on, kind of where photography came from. You know, photography really, you know, with Cartier-Bresson and many of the founders of street photography, they had a simple camera and they just went and documented what they saw. And so my project was the last semester of my university, and I did it in London, my last semester. And I decided to do it on the metro, on the underground, you know, their metro system. So for a couple of months, I just, you know, and I bought an old camera, like a 1950s camera, film camera, for like, I think it was £5, so like, I don't know, like $7 or something like that. And I just used that camera. And it didn't have a light meter. It was just the most basic camera possible, right? Shutter button, and your aperture, and your shutter speed. And your shutter speed weren't like third increments. It was like a limited number of shutter speeds you can use. But and I think this also addresses the fact, you know, a lot of young students, and I'm mentioning this because there are a lot of young photographers here, come into photography thinking the camera is what makes a photographer. Right? Absolutely not. You can have the most basic camera and make really intriguing, interesting images. So this is basic street photography done in the metro. And I gotta tell you, one of the things you need to have as a photographer is passion. Really, whatever genre of photography you do, you gotta have passion in photography, in whatever you do actually. And I'm saying this because I was terrified. I've always been like, I don't say terrified, but it's scary taking pictures candidly, right? It's very scary. You don't know how people are gonna react, especially when you're in a small, you know, in a metro where you can't run away, you can't go anywhere, you know. But I was so driven to do photography, I was so passionate about photography that I pushed myself. You know, I had so many conversations, Eric, just do it, just take the picture, just pull up the camera. And all of these pictures, like from this one where the person's actually looking at me, or this one, I don't give them a second to react to me. Because for me, you know, I teach class at American University, and it's a beginning class, it's the only class we offer. And you know, I usually get like 20 students, 15 to 20 students, and a lot of them when they come, and you know, they're not interested in photography. You know, they're taking the class because they think, just like why I took my first photography class. They thought it might be fun, they thought it might be easy, so they don't really have a lot of background in photography. But when they come, they always, because I show a lot of documentary work in that class, even though it's a beginning class, and they always question, you know, how could you take pictures without permission, right? But, you know, for me, photography is documentary photography. You know, there's other genres of photography, there's commercial work, there's so many different kinds of art photography, but for me, what really gives it meaning to me is that photographing reality. And so, photographing something that's not posed. I mean, I'm not even considering portraits. Portraits are a little different. You can do posed portraits also, and it could be very genuine. But for me, it's very important to, what gives photography meaning is capturing reality. And that's why I have a lot of issues with, for instance, AI photography. You know, I want to talk about modern photography. I don't know if that's considered modern photography, but anyway, I'm back. Let me backtrack a little bit. What was I saying? I was talking about, yeah, so for me, you know, I had to learn how to photograph people without them noticing, you know, getting very close to people. For instance, this image, you know, in photography, you have to be always aware of your surrounding. You know, it's very difficult. Even today, when I carry my camera around, I'm not making a lot of pictures because doing photography, it's like you have to be out doing photography. You can't just have a camera with you. At least in my case, I can't just have a camera because it needs time. You have to be constantly looking. You're constantly making observations. Oh, I see that person over there, but maybe I gotta walk from this side over there because the background on that side is better. So before you even take the picture, you're making all these you know, small decisions, right? So for instance, this picture right here, you know, I'm ready. I have my exposure ready. I see that guy, I'm walking. I know where I need to be to lift up my camera to take that picture. It's not a question of, oh, let me look, let me focus, let me see what my exposure, because the moment's going to be gone. It's over, right? So you have to do basically take a picture and move on, right, to the point where the person doesn't even understand what happened. Did that person just take a picture of me, or is there like something in the background that they took a picture of? So, but anyways, it was a very you know, challenging work doing street photography, but I think it's so rewarding to be able to capture a moment that's so genuine, you know, a moment like on the train, you know, like a couple, you know, her head on his shoulders, or this for me is actually very meaningful because this was done early when I started this project. I think I worked on this project for a month, and I got on the train, I see this guy, he looks sad, he looks kind of like not happy, and I'm sitting across from him, and of course just take a picture. And a month later, it was at the end of my project, I see the same guy in the same position. He had a little bit of beard, wearing the same, almost the same clothes, looking the same body language. I mean, just like, this guy's been going to work for how long? He's taking the same train every day. He seems like I don't say he has a miserable life, I don't know, but that picture right there, and seeing the same situation again, I realized like that mundane, you know, life that he had was evident in just this picture, but then it was verified with the other picture. So I finished, you know, I'm done with the university, and I started working, I moved, this was in Northern California, I finished, I moved back to Los Angeles, and I started working for a newspaper, not the LA Times, there's a second newspaper in LA called the Daily News. It's a smaller newspaper, so I started working with them, freelancing for them. You know, I was trained to be a newspaper photographer. Back then, you know, in the United States, every large city had 2 newspapers. Every other city, town had their own newspaper. So a lot of photographers graduating from university were being trained to work at a newspaper. But newspaper had its limitations. It wouldn't give you a lot of time on a story. You couldn't do international stories. You know, everything was 80, you know, very short. You photographed this, you published it the same day, which was great. I'll show you some work that I've done on newspapers, which was great. But I wanted to do more. I wanted to do more international stories. So I started doing my own project on Iran. You know, there was a lot of stereotypes about Iran. You know, the world saw Iran as a government. The world saw Iran as the way they saw the government of Iran, and I think you know that's the case with a lot of times. But I wanted to kind of break that stereotype. So my idea was to show the 2 sides of Iran, and you know the projects I'm going to show here are shorter parts of the project. I'm not showing the full project. I'm just showing segments of it. But I want to talk about the importance of finding your own project to work on. And the reason I wanted to show this and mention this is because, you know, if you're starting out as a photographer, you know, access is very important to photojournalism, having access to certain things. And you have to look at what you have access to. Think of whether you're female, whether you're older, whether you're younger, whether it's a region, community you live in. Think about what are the things that I have access to that other people don't. Because that's going to give you such an advantage. Because a big challenge of a photojournalist is getting access. You know, being able to get close and intimate to your subjects that you're photographing. So if you're doing photography or starting, think about what do I have access to, and start there, and that usually it'll build on itself. I'll make this a little bit smaller so you can see the full frame. So at first I was just going to Iran and kind of doing street photography almost, and then the more I went to Iran, obviously I was committed to more. I started doing their presidential elections. So I started covering all of their. Anytime there was a presidential election, I would go there. At first I started working with black and white film, and then I realized that obviously if you're going to work, you want to be published. A lot of places wouldn't publish black and white, so I started shooting color as well. But one of the great things about photography, and I'll talk more about it when I'm showing my single images of daily work that I did as a photojournalist, is that the places you get to visit, the access that you have to, for me that's so gratifying. Like the idea that I'm in Tehran, I'm at a Friday prayer. This is Ayatollah Khamenei, who's a spiritual leader of Iran. He's leading a Friday prayer, and I'm the only photographer there. For me, I don't know, everyone has different reasons what they do, but it's very gratifying for me to be there. Protests. I'm doing a lot of daily life, and I don't think I have a good representation of the two sides of Iran here, but I also wanted to kind of represent Iran in a different light. I remember in the 90s, this whole idea of two sides of Iran was very popular in the media, but it was almost like overly done. Like, oh, look at the parties that they're having, look at the pool parties they're having, the private, It was a little too much, I think. But I wanted to get access to that also. For instance, this image was done in 2002 maybe, but this was a big deal in Iran. To be not so much these days, but for a woman to wear a yellow scarf, to showing her hair, smoking in a cafe was huge. It's also interesting how some things that I photographed that were for me somehow very significant aren't anymore. And one of the examples is, I know during the revolution, I covered, it was the day, I don't remember which day it was, but everyone gathered in Republic Square. It was like everyone you can think of, old people, young people, and it wasn't the people who were protesting on a daily basis. It was such a moving experience seeing that. And then I made this series of portraits during that time. And for me, that represented the mood that was in the country, happening in the country, like all these different faces, right? But when I look at that, I'm like, all right, it's all right photos. It doesn't have the same meaning as it does today. Like even this, what I like about this, they're gossiping about these girls, right? But being able to capture that moment, I think is what I love about photography. For me, the picture is about, in a way, gossip. They're kind of talking about this girl. How do you capture that in an image? This is one of the protests that happened in the Green Movement. I stopped going to Iran after the Green Movement because I just was so I lost all hope for Iran afterwards because a reformist president, lost the election. I think it was very fraudulent, and there were major protests afterwards. But it really just changed people just lost all hope, and I as well also, because I wanted to, since I left Iran when I was when the revolution happened, I wanted to be part of it again. And of course, I want what's best for Iran as well. And I know a lot of people are having, living under Islamic group is not what they want. So, jumping ahead, during this time, as I was doing this project, I was still working on a newspaper, the LA Daily News, and I continued to go to Iran, because again, I wanted to not just work for newspapers, but I wanted to work for magazines, news magazines. And so this was the time I'd gone to Iran to kind of continue working on my project. And the reason again, the question was, what image, I'm translating, Google translated the reverse question, what image really has significance in your career maybe? And I think this is the image that had the most significance in my career, which is a War Press photo. This was taken in 2002. It received the 2003 War Press Photo Award. And this is also one of the most, I guess, I don't want to say difficult photographs I've made, but most emotional photographs that I have made. I was in Tehran sometime in the morning. There was an earthquake. I got up, I felt it, and again, I'm not sure if, you don't know, is it something that happened in Tehran where I was staying and it was just a minor earthquake, or is it something bigger, a little further away? It took a couple of hours for us to realize that it was like 200 kilometers away from Tehran where the earthquake happened, and to get some information where it happened. And immediately I called the driver to come pick me up. I called my photographer friend. I said, "Are you interested? I'm going." She said yes. I went and picked her up. Her mother was there also, so it was me, the driver, the mother of the photographer, and so we went there, and we got there. It was in the afternoon already. It took us about 2.5 hours, I think, to get there. And you know, I started photographing. It was really devastating. I mean, it's like, and we got there very soon after it happened. So people were in shock. People were in disbelief. You know, I have a lot of pictures from there where it's like people were like just, you know, they lost family. So it's very devastating. Circumstance to be in, and then we understood that they were burying people. They were trying to bury people before sunset. And in the Islamic board, you know, if someone dies, you try to bury them before sunset. So it was up on a hill. I went there. It was starting to get dark, and yeah, I have this. I don't want to say terrible. It's kind of, but I have this thing where I put myself in other people's shoes. I picture myself in other people's shoes, and I was already doing that, and I was already feeling very, like, I guess, I don't want to say sensitive, kind of vulnerable, not vulnerable, that's not the right word, but I was emotional, I think, because like I was thinking, what if, you know, my parents were burying me, for instance, like things like that. And then I see this child, he's holding his father's trousers, they're burying his father. And there was this chaotic situation of people frantically trying to dig and trying to bury whoever they can. And this boy is just shocked, in shock still. And, usually I'm pretty good at, at this, I see a situation, I go to it and I take the picture because I don't want to lose the moment. But I had, maybe it lasted a couple of seconds, I don't know, but I had this internal debate. Do I have the right to intrude on a boy's privacy in a moment of, like, the boy's vulnerable. What right do I have to get close to him and take that picture? But I also know I need to get close. I can't just be far away and take a picture. I need to get close enough where, his face is visible, because if his face is invisible, if you can't read his emotions, then it's not going to work. So I have to be close enough, but I also have to have enough of what's going on around him to give it context to what the picture is happening. So earlier, it was like I'm pushing myself. It was that, like, what do they call, the angel and the devil on your shoulders? And I'm having this debate. And again, it might have lasted like 10 seconds, or I don't know, even less than that. But I was having it. Of course, I went and took the pictures. I think I took 5, and the kid wasn't even aware I was there. There's, and something I'll address to why I appreciate photographing in situations like this is because you can't get any more pure emotions than in a situation like this. I walk into this room and I pick up a camera, everyone's gonna, as much as you guys are photographers and maybe you understand what documentary photography is, you're gonna maybe sit up, or something's gonna change about you, right? And in a moment like this, where nothing else matters, the people don't care about the photographer, right? You become like a fly on the wall. You're not even present because they're in shock. They have so many other things on their mind that this is when you find the most genuine emotions that is very difficult to find when you're out doing daily work. So anyways, I took this picture, and another photographer. There was me, Nafis Mokhtar, who's my friend, and an associated press photographer. As I was taking the pictures, he came next to me and started taking a picture with a flash, because it was getting darker, the sun was already setting. And he works for a wire service, and wire service is a different game. It's not about aesthetics anymore, it's just about information, right? And he started taking pictures and I kind of left. I was like so angry because I'm having this complete debate, trying to take a picture, and here we have a photographer. I'm not blaming him, that's kind of what his job was, but you know. So anyway, so that happened. So the reason I'm bringing up this picture, obviously we're all, you know, all the presenters here tonight were connected with winning in the World Press. And I want to talk about how it was significant in my life as a photographer, because this really opened up the door for me to editors. You know, I was recognized as people wanted to see me, people wanted to do my work, and this was the kind of gave me the opportunity to kind of expand from just working at a newspaper and starting to freelance as a photojournalist, working for more magazines, kind of what my, I guess, ideal job would be as a photojournalist. By the way, I think I myself and a lot of people it was the worst time for photojournalism because, you know, magazines, newspapers lost the ability to advertise anymore. So, you know, people just couldn't afford, because everything went online, people just couldn't afford to pay photographers, to hire photographers. So, but but I want to talk about how that kind of winning the World Press photo gave me the ability to work on a lot of other stories, international stories, that I probably wouldn't have had the ability to work on if I hadn't won World Press photo, because I worked as a freelance photojournalist at an agency now that represented me, and working as a freelance photographer, you had to put up the cost to do any story. You know, magazines, like I said, it's not the 80s where magazines would hire you, send you somewhere, all expenses covered. In those days, and now you had to put up your own costs, and obviously I couldn't afford to go fly, spend I don't know how many, week or two someplace. So I had with my agency, we split all the costs, and then whatever was sold, we would split the cost as well. So I'm just gonna go, again, these aren't the full stories that I've done, just parts of the stories, just so you guys get an understanding of the kind of work I've done in the past. But again, they cover a lot of situations where I think you don't get these kinds of emotions any other situation. 404, what time did we start?
Eric, can you move the cursor?
Yeah, sorry.
And full frame, please.
And what? And something else?
Full frame.
Full frame. I can't do any more. I can make this bigger, yeah. Because when I do full frame, then you don't see the full image. Sorry. And if I do full frame, it messes up. So this is the Banda Aceh, or the tsunami that happened. This is a while ago. Most of these photographs are a while ago. 2000. I don't know, 2005, 6? No, it was 2004 maybe. 2004, 2005. And
where was it again?
in Banda Aceh, Indonesia. That's where the tsunami was hit the hardest. And this is a hospital. I wanted to mention this picture. And I don't know if you guys have heard of microcomposition. But I remember when I was making this picture, because photography is not just about what's in front of you. There's so much to it. There's a background, there's a foreground, there's so many elements that happen in that frame that as a photographer you have to be aware of, the placement of everything. And I remember this photograph, I wasn't concerned about this person in terms of composition. I knew where they were. My eye was on this and him here, and this guy walking by. At first this guy didn't come by, but I'm like, okay, I need to have space here. This is how minute I think composition can go up. I need to have a little space here so his head touches in here. I need to see enough of his head so you see that there's a person, there's a person over there. And then obviously this person came by, walked by, and I'm like, okay, I need to get at this part of it, not too much of it. But it's also interesting now, if I go back and look at these photographs, my whole shoot, I see maybe it's because I'm bored and I'm tired of seeing the same images, but when I go go back and look at my work, let's say this story, other images stand out that don't stand out and that I didn't pick out initially. And I think, again, this is why it's important to sometimes have, it's always important to have an editor look at your work, you know, as a photojournalist. You know, I did that story, I stayed there for 12 days, and then 3 months later I went back to kind of see, you know, what the progress was. And of course there wasn't really no progress. You can't make any progress in 3 months. So these are 3 months later. This man was just, you know, he was rebuilding his home. I don't know if you guys know what tsunami was and what had happened, but basically tsunami came and just wiped away villages after villages. I think in this bandage, like 200,000 people were died from the tsunami. All the homes were wiped away. So I'm just going to jump to another story now. This is an earthquake that happened again in Indonesia. And again, like being there, like, you know, you're able to see emotions that are so genuine. I mean, these people are just lost. They're kind of wandering, you know, through their town, and you know, it's like they don't care about me. Even if they see me, they don't care about me, which is very hard to find in, you know, anywhere else. You know, this boy was at a hospital and he had diarrhea, and you know, he's standing in the pool of his diarrhea, just waiting for medical care. I think this is one of my stronger pictures from that earthquake, and again, this is like where you end up. You know, this was, I was walking around, I saw a house that was collapsed, I saw people on the roof of the house that had collapsed, I climbed up on the roof, and I realized there were people, I thought at that moment that they were trapped. So I go through the roof, I go inside the house, and part of the house has collapsed. This is the part of the house that hasn't collapsed, and they're basically pulling out the family members who had died, who were stuck in that collapsed area. And you know, it's just amazing where photography takes you. You know, photojournalism, documentary photography, what places it takes you. I mean, these are very sad situations, but it's, you know, it just, you know, it puts you in places and you see perspectives and you see, you know, you understand you're not, there's so much else going on in the world, you know, and it really changes your perspective on things. I went during the Iraq War, I was there for 3 months. I went there after the invasion when the US went into Iraq, and I spent 3 months there. It was a very difficult time because, again, as a freelancer, you know, I don't know if I'm cut out to be a freelance photographer. You know, a freelance photographer, you know, you have to be, to make it as a photographer, obviously, you can become a good photographer by practicing, by, you know, by doing photography, you become better, right? But one of the most important parts about photography is you have to have drive. You really have to have drive, and you have to know how to network, especially in photojournalism. Something that I was never good at, but it's so important to know how to network and put yourself out there. You know, people aren't going to come, in my head, people are going to come to me. They're going to call me and say, Eric, what are you doing? Can you go? It doesn't work like that, no matter what kind of recognition you have. You have to go and meet people and find editors. You have to pitch story ideas. So that's, I think, more important than being a good photographer. This was a hospital that, you know, so I was, during the 3 months I was there, I was trying to find something to photograph every day, and I was trying to find stories to work on. And one of the stories I worked on was a hospital that dealt with spinal cord injuries in Baghdad. And after the invasion, you know, there was a lot of looting in Baghdad. I mean, everything was looted. Museums, banks, hospitals, they took at everything. everything was stolen. So this was the only spinal cord injury center in all of Iraq. It was in Baghdad, and they didn't have any equipment. And you had a lot of, what I realized was that there was a lot of Iraqi civilians who were injured, who were, there was a lot of people who were killed, but they were injured by friendly fire, meaning that there were civilians, they weren't fighting the Americans, they were just caught by whatever, they were shot, not by intention, but they were caught in the middle of something. And a lot of them had spinal cord injuries, which means they were paralyzed. But after the war happened, a lot of them didn't have anywhere to go. The families couldn't take them anywhere, so they were stuck at home. And because they were paralyzed, they couldn't move their bodies, and the families didn't have enough knowledge or training to know that if you don't move someone over time, the meat basically starts rotting. And this is what the case is. There were some really severe where parts of their bodies were missing because they just rotted away until So I did that story. Honestly, I spent a couple of weeks on it. It was never published. But what I want to say about that is sometimes you work on stories and they lead to other stories. For instance, that story, while I was in Iraq, an editor of a journal, it was called Acumen Science of Journal, which was a medical journal, but it was really beautifully done medical journal. They used photography really well. And because of the work that they saw I had done on that hospital, they said, can you work on photographing 2 doctors in Baghdad, and I did a story on that, So I'm saying sometimes things don't work out. Sometimes you put all that effort into something, it doesn't really work out, but it does lead to other things, this was a hurricane in Louisiana in the United States. There was this highway, and the highway was surrounded by water because of the floods. And so everyone was stuck on the highway. Everyone was stuck, they couldn't get out because it was surrounded by water. You can see it was this is from that bridge, from the highway also, you can see it's just water. And for days they were stuck there. And it was just very, the story here is that Bush, I think, was the president then. And he didn't, how are we doing on time, by the way?
It's okay.
They didn't respond fast enough. So these people were surrounded because they didn't respond because there was a lot of it was a majority black community. And they were saying, they were being dangerous, so we're shooting at people. So the first responders wouldn't go there immediately. So that became the story. I don't even know how I got there. I don't even remember how I ended up on that. Because it's surrounded by water, I don't know how I got there. But a lot of these pictures are on the bridge. People are just stranded there. There was a truck abandoned there, and carried water, sort of washing. People were using the water to shower. She had diabetes. She didn't have her medication. This man just died on the highway. He didn't get attention. He didn't get medication. He died. So I'm going to jump. These are the stories I did. Some of the stories I did. International work, but working as a freelance photographer in Los Angeles, I covered a lot of different stories. Right, a lot of them were probably awful. I don't always make great photographs. A lot of times I think pictures just don't work, right? But one of the great things about doing this job is people that you get to meet, situations you get to experience. And really, I don't think there's, I can think of some other jobs that are as fulfilling as this, but I think it's the ability for you to experience so many different situations. Of course, I wouldn't have experienced most of those situations if I wasn't a photographer and I didn't have a camera. I'm not interested in going places, which is awful, if I don't have a camera. If I felt like I couldn't document it, then what's the point of it? I did so many portraits, in LA, especially being in LA. There was a lot of demand, or there was a lot of things related to movies. music, arts. So I ended up doing a lot of those portraits, which is very difficult, I really respect photographers who can do portraits, who can set up situations, or even commercial photographers. I don't have that ability. I can't create things. I don't like putting things together. I don't do that because I'm not good at it either. But I don't like it because for me, photography is that genuine moment that you capture. Doing portraits is quite difficult. You have to put the person in place, think about the lighting. There's so much thought that's put into it. I don't know if you guys remember Whitney Houston. She died. This was kind of a memorial held for her. This is, I forget her name. She was an actress. Anytime a film came out, all these, you would have to do portraits of all of these actors, actresses, directors. But I'm going to show a little bit of diversity of what there is to cover. Sumo wrestling in LA. Lingerie basketball. This was actually a basketball league in Los Angeles. It was how ridiculous it could be. I mean, some were good players, but the idea was to attract viewers, so they made them play in lingeries. This was when Obama and John McCain, who was a nominee for the Republican Party, this was election night, and I was assigned to go to cover John McCain on his election night. And these were his followers, kind of like supporters. And this is when John McCain lost to Obama. And this is a kid, of course, but his father. But it was like, and I did a whole series of that. I had it was for whatever reason. I don't work with long lenses. I usually work with a 50mm lens, and a 50mm on a full frame, not a 50 on a crop frame. But I had rented a 300mm lens. I don't know why, because I thought John McCain was going to be there and I couldn't get close for whatever reason. So I started doing portraits of the supporters of John McCain who had just lost. Like as the numbers were coming in and it was obvious he's losing, their faces just went from happy, excited because they thought they were going to win to like sad. So I just did a series of portraits, like in a matter of 10 minutes, of all these Republicans who realized, oh, their nominee is not winning. Like this was a family. I don't think there was a husband involved. I think it was a mother and her 2 kids who were living in a trailer because they didn't have a home, And like the access that you get, like that ability when you have a camera to get into places that you would never be able to see, what people go through. I did stories for like, this was for the New York Times, and I think it was about they had this thing called 24 hours in, like, Malibu, 24 hours in Santa Monica, 24 hours in wherever, right? And it was 36 hours actually. So this was a part of it, like it's a museum, This was a story about a producer, and one Ry Cooder. He produced some of the Beatles albums. He was a musician himself. We went to the desert with him because he had come out with a record. And so it's like it puts you in situations that are really, makes the work interesting. Fires, we had a lot of fires. I was covering a lot of fires. So jumping to where I am today, I moved here in 2013, December of 2013. So in a couple of months, I'll be here 10 years living in Armenia. And I'm not working as much as a photojournalist these days. I teach now a little bit, there's different reasons why I'm not doing photography as much, but I want to kind of just talk about some of the stories. I think I've covered, and I want to talk about how living in Armenia and kind of photographing in Armenia over time, I've developed a different relationship to my perspective about what I do has become shifted overall. Because a lot of the stories I covered, like the international stories I showed you guys, of course I get emotional, and I'm very good with containing my emotions, so obviously I have to be very professional in whatever situation I'm covering, but it was a matter of the fact for me a lot of times. Like, this is the situation, I'm there, and I'm there to photograph. And thinking about what to present or what to talk about, I realized not so much in the beginning, because this is in Gyumri. If you guys remember, there was a soldier, Russian soldier, who had kind of wandered off from his base, went into a home, and killed a whole family, you know. And this was a funeral for one of the children. I think the youngest one who died after the funeral for the rest of the family. You know, this was, 2016 war. I'm just showing one picture from each project. 2016 war, and the 4-day war we called it. This was I can't remember what town, if this was Martaket, Martuni, or Talish, I can't remember. But this kind of says the power of photography. This is an image of a wall, but it shows how quickly, as Anu showed her photo also, people just left everything and left. And here, you have a person who took a picture of something of, there's a cross here, and I don't know what the picture could have been a family portrait, what was most important to them, and just left the house. And you can see from this one picture how long these people lived in this home. Like, how long have you lived here? Where, like, you can see the difference in the color, of the wall and what was behind the cross and that frame. This was during the revolution, and I think even though I'm now working as a photojournalist, when significant events happen, it's like I have to cover it. I have to document it. And the revolution, I wrote the EVN report. This was one of the early nights. Again, it's an okay picture, but I think it really represented, what was happening that day. Like, I think that kind of really, this image was kind of like a representation of that evening. People related to it a lot. This is from the arts opera we just had, and again, I was there with EVN report, and we were there we took 4 or 5 trips there, during the 44 days, and even afterwards, because we went after the signing as well. But, it was different. It was different covering this story than covering anything else, I mean, there were so many emotions, that we were experiencing from, at first it was just frustration, I mean, initially I'm sure there was some fear in terms of going and covering this, but that can easily kind of be put aside. The frustrations that came afterward, the access, that we as Armenian journalists were getting, but foreign journalists was getting. It was like, so there was a lot of emotions, but the reason why I want to talk about this photo, I think it's one of my stronger images from Artsakh. We have finally had access to one of the hospitals, the Stepanakert Hospital, which is it's a city hospital, not a military hospital. And before that, we had, we were outside. They wouldn't let us even get close to the hospital. Like, we wanted just to take whatever images we can. We could do any kind of recording, and we were being stopped. And so we finally got access to it, and while we were there, there were soldiers being brought in, wounded soldiers, civilians that were constantly being brought into the hospital. And at this moment, a number of wounded soldiers came. I was already taking pictures for maybe 20 minutes when this soldier was brought in, and and they were trying to save his life. And the reason why, I should let me back up here. Before that, when we were trying to get access to the hospital, we would see all these doctors, nurses, mostly doctors outside of the hospital smoking, right? And we would talk to them, can we get access? No. We talked to the director, the head of the surgery department. No, you can't get access to it. And, you were already building this, I don't want to say resentment, but kind of this, you had this anger, like, why can't we get access to this? This is important, we need to get this information out. And again, when we're seeing foreign journalists going, and so there was already this kind of negative perception of who were not allowed, like the people who were stopping us from getting in. And anyway, so we're in there now, we got access, we're shooting, and you know, they tried to save his life. It was a chaotic situation. It was me, another videographer, and a German videographer, I think it was German, really tall guy, and there was another female journalist there with her. And we were trying to manage ourselves within this confined area where everyone was trying to save his life. They weren't able to save his life, you know. So at some point the director said to us, stop, you know. So we left, I went outside, and I was talking to Rubina, who was there with me. I think it was Rubina I was talking to, and I saw the same, it was a director, or it was the head of surgery, I can't remember, having a smoke outside. And he was like, the same look that he had on when he was smoking outside, and he was there. He was like the head person there. He was experiencing this, and he was just there smoking a cigarette. And I realized in that second that all that, like the way we were perceiving this guy who wasn't letting us in, was experiencing this on a daily basis. This intense situation. And here I was kind of like, how come he doesn't let us in, or being all like, but I broke down. Like I went away and I started crying. It was like such a to understand, obviously the experience that, you know, a lot of us went was pretty intense, you know, but that seeing that doctor's face who was like, you understood he's going through this every day, like since the war started, he's dealing with number of casualties every day. And for him, he was just out there smoking because there's no other way. I mean, what are you gonna do? You know, you can't be, you know, you have to be strong in it. I don't say he's strong, but it was just like, sometimes you don't understand what other people are going through. And we make judgments about other people. You know, and it was that moment that I understood what he himself and everyone else that worked there was going through on a daily basis. Do I want to add anything? Because that was the last photo. I think that's it. I'll start with that. Yep. I talked a lot. Non-stop.
2 or 3 questions. Hayır, check out.
For example, that's fine.
Արտոյսոր անգլերեն չգիտե մասնասիրությունը, քո նույնիսկ նկատեցի, որ արհավիրքն շատ ես նկարել, այսինքն ինքնաշարժեր, ջրղերներ չէ, առաջին է Պարսկաստանից է սկսել առաջի բանը։ Ինչ ազդեցություն, ինչի տակ որոշեցրան այդ առաջին ազդեցությունը Պարսկաստանի ինքնաշարժի, որ հետո մյուսները սկսեցին նկարել։
Պարսկաստանի չէ, ասեմ, կարծեմ ես իմ համար շատ ինչու սկսել այս բաները նկարել, հա?
Առաջինը Պարսկաստանից, չէ։
Ինչա՞։
Առաջինը Պարսկական երկրաշարժի։
Առաջինը Պարսկաստանում երկրաշարժը, չէ, նախնում եմ ես Լոս Անջելեսում եմ նկարել նոր ջրկրեք, աշակերտ եմ, կապույցան նկարել եմ, բայց ես մաս ինչա, մեկ կողմից մեզ չեմ ուզում ասեմ, որ հաճելի է, դες չի, հաճելի չի, իսկապես ասեն չեմ սիրում եմ, logistical որ ինձ և հասնես, դա շատ դժվար է, այդ ամենադժվար մասն է իմ համար, դες չի, որ ես ուզում եմ այդ ամբարման, բայց այդ emotion-ները, որ կարող ես ասեմ, կարող ես նկարես այդ վիճակի մեջ, ուրիշտե չես կարող, և իմ համար այդ մեզ և ուզում եմ, ամենս ես մաս անգլերեն անեմ, I feel like I have to lecture people sometimes with my photograph. Like I have to show them a photograph, see what's going on in the world. Maybe it's a little childish, but you know, to do that. But I feel like people need to see sometimes situations that they would typically not. Maybe that's how photography affected me, and I feel like photography can have the same impact on other people. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
You talked about that you're teaching in Armenia. And what are the features of your teaching method? Maybe you have something special that you want to give the students.
You know, I'm not an educator. I definitely don't have the background as an educator. So I freelance as a teacher in terms of how I conduct my class. You know, I've been teaching at AUA, you know, for about 6 years now. And I still every time I'm teaching, it's like I'm doing it for the first time. You know, it's like, what am I going to do today? What am I going to talk about today? But so your question is, what's my approach to teaching? You know, I think my approach is basically teaching the basics of, you know, I teach a manual, how to use a camera manually. And maybe it's not the most necessary because most of the students at AUA who take my class aren't interested in photography as a career. So why teach them manual, how to use a camera manually, right? But for me, it really, I think, gives photography importance. And I think, you know, it also starting with manual, you know, you're talking about aperture, you're talking about exposure, how that affects the image, I think is quite necessary, you know, than rather just clicking, you know, just everything, the camera does everything for you. So I started with that, and, you know, I jumped into documentary photography. At first I tried to do not just documentary photography, but because I think for me it's the most significant form of photography that has the most meaning. You know, that has the most impact. So I right away kind of talk about documentary photography, and I really talk about composition. People don't understand composition. You know, they don't know what it takes to make the photo. You know, you have so many elements that you have to put together. You know, that makes an image. You know, it's not just your subject. So I really focus on that as well.
Can I also ask a question? Did I understand it right that you don't ever engage in verbal interaction with the subjects, be it you're in street photography or photojournalism, documentary photography? This is the first question, whether we get into verbal interaction with them, be it just showing the photo or asking permission to post the photo somewhere. And the second question, you said that there are several reasons why you stopped taking photos. So is it something you could share, like the main reason with us?
Sure. So let's start with the first question is, you were saying that I came across that I don't ask for permission and I don't talk to my subject?
Yes, the question was whether you ever like approach them, ask even after taking the photo, ask if
You know, with street photography, I mean, with journalism, you have to talk to people. When you're doing photojournalism, a lot of times you're talking to people. Sometimes it's non-verbal communication. Sometimes, you know, especially with the international stories I showed you, because I didn't know their language. Like, I don't know their language, right? And sometimes you connect with them differently. Sometimes I just go close enough to them. I just kind of hold my camera in my hand, I just look at them. I don't show any emotions, I just look at them. And they immediately kind of tell you, they don't verbally say anything, but their reaction to you being there tells you whether or not it's okay for you to take pictures. I would never like jump into someone's face or get close and take pictures without some acknowledgement. Unless it's a situation where there's a lot of things happening. But for instance, that first shot from Tsunami where the guy was crying, he was covering his face. Like, I approached him, I didn't talk to him, and I just showed him the camera, and I see how he reacts to me. You know, if he says no, I'll respect that and I'll go away. If he doesn't say anything, or just even nods, I understand he understands what I'm doing there and what the purpose of me is, and then I continue photographing. Street photography is a little different. Street photography, you know, there's a kind of street photography when you do just, you know, lines, graphic, more graphic elements, and then there's when there's people, right? With people, I think, you know, really it changes when you ask for permission, you know, and their behavior changes. And so I try to, for the most part, and I'm not actively working as a street photographer taking pictures a lot, but you know, I try to do candid. If I see a moment, I don't ask permission. I don't ask if I'm going to take, if I can use their photos or I can post it, because I'm not really posting my photos, but I don't talk to him afterwards either, because for me, talking to him afterward just means more trouble. What if they don't like that they didn't understand you took a picture, but what if they question it? I don't want to get into that kind of conversation, right? But there has been even street photographer ask for portraits. If you look at photographers like Mary Ellen Mark, I'm blanking on names. Some of the street photographers, it's all like they're portraits, they're street portraits, but they're all like, can I take a picture? And they're beautiful, because it's not about body language anymore. It's just about that person, his face, So it really depends what kind of street photography you're doing. But I remember walking one time on Tehran, and I saw a guy, in the Dalans, there's this kind of, what are they called? Budkas in the Dala, and this part of the Dalan itself. And there is huge guys, with his head outside of the window there, they have where you buy things. And I'm like, I'm not going to take his picture without permission, I don't know, this guy looks like he could have a problem. So I asked him, I said, I just said, Garman the Garbesnam, and he agreed to it, which was wonderful. But he didn't change his body language, he just looked at me instead of, So sometimes I find situations where I do have to ask for permission. And I understand when I ask for permission, it's not a moment that I'm trying to capture, it's more about maybe the background and the subject matter and how they relate to each other, and it's okay if they're looking at the camera. So there are times where I do ask for permission. The other question, why did I stop taking pictures, or why am I taking pictures less in Armenia? I think there's a number of reasons. One of them, you really have to work hard as a photographer, especially in Armenia, to make a living. And I couldn't see myself doing that, to be honest. And so for me, and I was older, I wasn't older 10 years ago when I first came to Armenia, but it just, and I couldn't work for international magazines. There just wasn't any interest. I covered the war, I covered the 2016 war, I covered the revolution. There was hardly any interest internationally for my photographs. So the idea of even working in Armenia as a journalist, but doing it for international publication didn't exist. And there are many publications in Armenia to work for, unfortunately, So I kind of, and for me, a lot of my life, I identified myself as a photographer. Like, should I do this so there's more light? I identified as because I had so many, it was difficult for me to do other things. Like, I really kind of put too much emphasis on me as a photographer. Like, that's who I identified with. But at some point I was comfortable with not being identified as a photographer anymore. So I didn't feel that need to be working as a photographer. Were there any other reasons why you stopped? I'm a little bit lazy also, to be honest. So put them all together. I'm not working as a photographer as much these days. But when I think significant stories that happen in Armenia, I'm really, it's not a question of even being paid for those anymore. It's like as part of, I feel obliged to be part of that and cover those stories.